Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 391, and today's guest is Joseph Krause, co-founder and CEO of Radical AI. There are so many benefits with the platform shift to AI, but one of the clear benefits that I'm seeing is how some of the most brilliant minds are working on incredibly meaningful and challenging problems. While yes, there is a need for lots of applications, even another photo sharing app, I've always strongly believed that the best entrepreneurs should be leveraging their intellect to work on something that could actually change the world. Meet Joseph, an entrepreneur who has built his career for this moment. He has a bias for action and a go big or go home approach with a startup that is looking to completely reconstruct the scientific process, and if successful, it will replace multinational corporations like Dow Chemical. Radical AI is building a self-driving lab which will accelerate materials R&D to tackle the world's most pressing problems. Through the integration of AI, engineering, material science, and applied research, Radical AI is changing the way materials are designed, developed, and discovered. The company announced a $55 million seed round of funding led by RTX Ventures, joined by N Ventures, NOAA, Infinite Capital, NI Next, AliCorp, and many others. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like the details of Radical AI's recommendations with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy for the 2025 National AI Research and Development Strategy Plan, Joseph's background story and experience in academia, DevCom Army Research Lab, and the National Guard, how a cold email landed him a position in venture capital and his time at AliCorp, the full story of Radical AI, and how they are addressing material science challenges with an innovative approach, the self-driving lab concept, and why Radical AI is a generation-defining opportunity, building a culture of action, hiring plans, and so much more. All right, now a brief word from our podcast sponsor, Silicon Valley Bank. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Joseph. Joseph, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about your background story. Your company just raised a very large seed round of capital, so we're going to break that down and what your company's working on now. But to kick things off, I obviously is everywhere. It's every conversation I have, especially in this podcast. But I thought it was interesting because your company had this, um, recommendations to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is essentially I guess a roadmap for American innovation. And I wanted to get a sense from you, since I have you as an expert, of what your recommendations were as it relates to the U.S. and AI, and kind of where does the U.S. stand in the world of, there's other countries that are obviously working aggressively in AI. So I just wanted to get your point of view for these things, what these recommendations, and where does the U.S. stand?
Absolutely. Great place to start, Keith. We can dive right into it. And this is something we care a lot about and have put a lot of energy into. Me and a couple other people on the team, Beth Winterholler and others, have really put a lot of effort into understanding how we can bring materials back to the forefront of the innovation cycle, and in America specifically around all the technologies that we're pushing today. And so I think the first thing to call out is there's been a lot of really good leadership right now from OSTP on trying to understand where should we be focusing our AI efforts today. Obviously, that's a broad question. There's a lot of fields that can go into that. But what are, from the innovators building in that field, from academia and everyone in between, where should we as a US government really be focusing time? And so I think from their perspective, it was really good to see this openness to receiving these requests for information from companies. And we were happy to write one, which is what you're alluding to. There were three core things that we talked about, and I'm happy to go into all of them in detail. Number one was really a national materials strategy, as we call it. Material science are the bedrock of almost all innovations that we see today. I'm sure we'll get deeper into this when we talk about radical AI, but what we really believe and what we've seen is other nations begin to understand that and then put serious amount of capital and talent into those areas. China, being a good example, sets up these entire industry facilities and hubs around manufacturing and scaling a single material system. And so they had this big, really buy-in and commitment to trying to scale materials. And so we made this big push and are continuing to make a big push around how do we make sure the United States is actually talking about material science, not just about radical AI, but in all of the fields that they're interested in driving innovation in. How do we make sure materials are a part of that conversation? The second was public data infrastructure. In material science, there is not a lot of data that's actually accessible and available to be used today, particularly when you're looking at the AI field. And there's a lot of competing representations that exist inside the space. And so we kind of had this big call for the government to help develop standards and actually approaches to how to make data unified and also accessible and usable by a lot of people working in materials. And then the third is really public private partnership. Material science is an incredibly hard business, incredibly capex intensive. And there are a lot of pieces, given it's been so fragmented over the last 100 years, that are very hard for one company to do. And so there are certain areas like testing and applications or thinking about ways to actually do research grants that the government can be a part of. And so there must be this connection between private enterprise like Radical AI, as well as the US government. And so we made a big call for their focus to both bring private innovators in and also look at kind of government funded resources, whether that's in academia or national labs, and meet in the middle. So that was kind of our top three priorities that we wanted to call out.
Very cool. And like, so you do these recommendations, like, like what happens? Like, is there someone that listens? Like, is there next steps? Like, I was just curious. Like,
Good question. A little bit more complex than you think too, meaning yes and no. Yes, it depends on the people that you are speaking to and their willingness to listen to outside industry, which we think this OSTP office is very open to. And so we actually went down to Washington, D.C. We have met with OSTP and a couple people on their team there. We told them our vision for materials, where we can help, what they need from us. And the answer with on the no is these things don't happen immediately, right? They are big policy objectives. They're very strategic in nature, asking for a lot of people to carve out what is going to be the action from that strategic plan. And so, no, we don't just come around and all of a sudden become the leading materials country again or start to have these hubs get built, but it's the first domino to fall and really starting to build a lot of momentum, a lot of traction, and actually having the general public as well as the kind of the research community understand we should put more time and energy into material science. And so they are absolutely paying attention. It's just not something that happens overnight. It's something you have to continue to pound the table on month after month until you really see the outcome come to fruition.
cool. We're going to talk about Radical AI, your company, and why this industry is a thing and why it matters. But before we get into that, let's talk about your background story. So, where'd you grow
Sure.
up? What were you like as a child?
Yeah, I grew up outside of Philadelphia in Montgomery County in a town called Jenkintown. Very curious as a child. Also nerdy. uh, and I had a great childhood. My family is the center of my life, both my current family, my wife and my daughter today, but my family from my parents to my siblings as well. And I was fortunate enough that I grew up super close to my family and that I always had this close knit of people around me. And I think that helped me actually really think about how I wanted to get outside the box. And we'll come back to that later. So, love that. I went to St. Joseph's Prep inside Philadelphia. Really awesome experience. I am Catholic.
Institution. If people aren't familiar with St. Joseph's Prep, it's an institution
It is
for
awesome.
Philadelphia.
I'm a massive fan of St. Joe's Prep, of course, being an alumni. And for me, was really an incredible experience for two different reasons. One, I'm a practicing Catholic. I'm very religious myself. And so that part of my education was very well felt. At a time, I didn't realize it, Keith, to be honest. Like looking back now is so important to my development as a human and in my faith. At the time, I was a high schooler who was like, why do we go to church? And kind of the normal things there. But number two, was really seeing people from all walks of life. It was really this melting pot inside Philly that had people from Jersey, people from Philadelphia, people from the suburbs and the main line, or from Montgomery, Bucks County in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania. So I just got to meet so many people who had so many different backgrounds and experiences than I did. And that was a really awesome experience. Made some great friends there. And from the education plus the friendships was an awesome experience, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.
All right, so you went off to Virginia Tech. What'd you study there?
I studied nanoscience, so I wanted to be a chemical engineer just because I thought it sounded cool, honestly. There wasn't much reason outside of that. And I go down to Virginia Tech with my parents for orientation. And I sit in on this intro seminar that they're giving to all the new students coming in. And this woman stands up and she gives a presentation on her research about imaging things at the atomic scale. And at the time, I didn't know this. It was what is called transition electron microscopy. And you can image these really small, at really the atomistic level. And I was so amazed that you could do something like this that I looked at my parents and said, "Yeah, I want to study that." They're like, "I don't know what that is, but knock yourself out, like have fun." And so I joined this new major, nanoscience. It was only 2 years old, I believe, at the time. Virginia was one of the first school, Virginia as a state, and then Virginia Tech was one of the first schools to adopt this program. And that was really at a bedrock of my interdisciplinary approach. Material science is an interdisciplinary field. You have chemistry, you have physics, you have even things like biology if you move into organics or in the bio world. And so nanotechnology really encompasses a wide range of fields inside of that at the smallest scale and really ignited this curiosity for discovery, which led to me pursuing a PhD at Rice University, which came after Virginia Tech. So that was where this kind of passion for research started and what I studied.
And that was, for your PhD, it was all material science, right?
Yes, it was. It's right. I was in material science and nano engineering, so a continuation of that nano, and was working on what are called 2D materials. And so there are these exotic materials that have really cool properties for the semiconductor industry. And I was working on something specifically called neuromorphic computing. And I'm happy to go into the details if you want, but long story short, we were trying to make semiconductors that operated more like the human brain and less like the chips that we have today, which actually separate the memory function of a semiconductor and the computation function. When you think about the human brain, you don't use different functions for storing a memory or for lifting your arm. Those are neurons that are all firing around. So it was this attempt to recreate chips like that. And then this led to me becoming frustrated with academia. I was working on such incredible research. I had amazing people around me at Rice, but it was academic, rightly so. That is academia's purpose, is to really drive your understanding of science, not to focus much on commercialization. And so I ended up getting a fellowship at the U.S. Army Research Lab. It's right outside of Washington, D.C. in Adelphi, Maryland. And it's the corporate R&D lab for the U.S. Army. So it's really cool. You do a lot of really fundamental and interesting work, but with this lens on trying to understand, okay, how do we start to push this stuff to what they call TRL 6 and 7, technology readiness level 6 and 7. And so we were really focused on how does our research commercialize in the future, particularly for the needs of the Department of Defense and the US Army. And that was an incredible experience. And that was kind of a stepping stone that came after that into venture and tech.
Yeah, and, so I wasn't familiar with that Army Research Lab, which I was just when I was reading into it, preparing for this conversation, I was like, wow, this is like the think lab of the Army, which is like
Correct.
what you saw must have been amazing.
It was so cool. So I can't tell you everything. I'm kidding. So really good scientists, really, really smart people who are actually dedicated to a bigger mission than themselves. At the same time that I was at the Army Research Lab, I was in the National Guard, the Army National Guard. Unrelated to those two things, I had joined the Army National Guard in my undergraduate and then had happened to get this fellowship at Army. And that was cool for me because we'd have a two-star general or a lieutenant colonel, come into the lab and ask the teams, what are you guys working on? And how can I tell my soldiers downrange, what's coming in the future? And being a soldier myself, although not downrange, stateside, was just a really cool parallel. I was actually working on technology that not in the next couple years, but certainly in the next 10 years was our goal. We'd actually be sending these things to protect the warfighter and really develop capability to build the strongest military in the world. That was such a cool overlap. And so all of the scientists there are really committed to that mission. They believe in America and supporting American innovation. And just got to see so many cool projects going so many different disciplines and with so many different organizations. I worked with Navy, I worked with Air Force, we worked sometimes with other agencies like DARPA, ARPA-E. It was a really interdisciplinary, fun spot to do work.
That's so cool. And because when you went to Virginia Tech, you weren't ROTC, were you?
I was not. I
Yeah.
did
Okay.
not.
Yeah.
I had thought about ROTC and then ended up just getting deeply ingrained in science and my studies. And I actually started undergraduate academic research my sophomore year of my undergraduate. So I stayed in Virginia Tech and did research over a whole summer. That was my job over the summer. And so I published my first paper from that program. And I just still felt this desire to serve. It had been something since I was a kid. I always thought it was so incredible, the men and women who have been in uniform, and I just wanted to get back. And I think it's actually a funny story. I went to enlist as a 09 Sierra in the National Guard, which is an officer candidate program that you go to basic training, you come back to college, you finish your senior year, and then you go back to officer candidate school and then basic officer leaders course. And when I got to MEPS to enlist in 09 Sierra, they said you don't have enough credit hours. You had to have 90 credit hours to be able to enlist, and as a 09 Sierra. So I was like, well, I just finished my junior year. What do you mean? She said, I need your transcript before I can let you enlist. Otherwise, how do I know you finished their classes? So I was like, okay, what are my options? She's like, well, you can one, go get that transcript when you get it in a couple of weeks and come back. And if you do that, the earliest basic training slot you can go to is probably July or August. So you will miss your fall semester at school, or you can just enlist today on the enlisted side. And I was like, yeah, I'm not missing graduation. So I
Right.
just enlisted on the spot.
I
My mother was angry. It was
was
her
gonna say,
birthday, actually, the day
hey
I
mom,
enlisted.
just a heads up.
Exactly right. And ended up being one of the best decisions I ever made. Um, I had done a lot of desk work, quote unquote, and being a researcher and having a lot of leadership roles growing up. That was an opportunity to learn how to follow. And I'm sure we'll get into this when we talk about running radical AI, but I really think good leaders have to first learn how to follow before they know how to lead. And the Army taught me that more than any other place in the world.
So, like on your LinkedIn profile, I love this. So you've finished with the highest GPA after 9 weeks of intense class and hands-on instruction, but also completed basic combat training, finishing in the top 10% of my class and named an honor graduate. So not only are you smart, brilliant, but you've got other qualities that are super helpful.
Listen, most things come back to hard work and bias to action, as we'll talk about when we get to the company. But the Army for me was easy. Sincerely, and what I mean by that is they told you where to be, what time to be there. They fed you 3 square meals a day at the exact same time or close to it. You weren't really going to miss it by much. And they told you the exact instructions that you needed for success. You just had to have discipline to execute across those things. And I was a big believer in discipline before. The Army honed my discipline intensely when I was there. And so for me, I couldn't believe I was getting paid to do this stuff. I mean, I was really learning how to land navigation and become a marksman and learn how to do combat, life saving support from situations, of course, when they go downhill. So it was just a wide range of experiences that me and myself had never been through before. And that was a really awesome learning curve. And I just thought it was incredibly fun to be getting paid to do it.
Okay. So how did you get into venture capital?
Sure. So I'm in this PhD, right? I'm at the Army Research Lab. And ironically, I had just passed my qualifying exam, which is a really big deal for a PhD. So, in a PhD in the US, it's typically 5 years. You'll spend the first 2 years in coursework as well as doing research. You'll spend that third year pulling that research together and making a thesis, like making a kind of an idea of where you want to go in a thesis. And then you'll spend the next 2 years or so executing on that research plan, coming up with your thesis, publishing your results, and then writing that in a dissertation. So I had done everything up to the third and fourth year where I passed my qualifying exam and was working on the research in my thesis, which was neuromorphic computing, as we talked about earlier, and then decided to leave after I had gone through all that. And so I was feeling this drive of, look, I'm not going to be a scientist. And I think a mistake I made before I went to graduate school was I was asking everyone else what qualifications I needed to do what I wanted to do. And I had heard a bunch of different, go to graduate school, you're good at research, and oh, you could just thinking about patent law, you could just go to law school. I wanted to be an entrepreneur this whole time, so oh, we'll get more science training if you want to start a science company. And so I still had this in the back of my head that like I don't want to be a professional scientist. I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know how to start a company. And I've read the books and I've taken Y Combinator class on you. I've done the things, but that can't be that easy. Everyone can do that. And so I said, well, let me go see about investing in them and learning from that. And then if the opportunity comes in the future, great, I'll start a company. And that's when I bumped into Kevin Ryan. So I cold emailed Kevin. I said, I think you should invest in material science. And if you're not investing in the future. He was like, I don't know about that. I've been doing this for 35 years. I kind of know where to invest, but why don't you come to New York, spend 6 months here, and we'll see how it goes. If it goes well, you found your new career. And if it doesn't, then you can go back and finish your PhD, no harm, no foul. And I said, great, I'll be there next week. And that was that.
So I wanted to understand, how did you know Kevin was a person that would be have an appetite for this?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. He was a past entrepreneur. He had started a lot of successful companies. I wanted someone I could learn from, could be a mentor to me. So first bucket checked. And then second is unique to his firm, Alicorp. They both incubate companies in-house and then invest in companies as well. And so when I was having conversations with him, there was talk around, look, you can invest in companies, but you should also think in you'll be required to try to innovate and actually think about new companies that we could start. You're not going to start all them, but it's really good to think about where gaps in the market are and whether we find an investment in that market or if we can't find one, decide to build a company in that market. That is your job as someone that's supposed to be investing in the future. And that for me was really interesting, given what I had just told you around. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to learn about building companies. And so that was kind of where I narrowed down. And Kevin responded to my cold email, which I thought was awesome.
Well, that I mean, it must have been compelling because I'm sure he gets lots and lots and lots of emails, and
For sure.
so I, I think this is a good lesson learned of reaching out. But what did you say that you think got his attention?
I think it was actionable. I mentioned what I had done, what I wanted to do, why I wanted to do it with him, and what I was able to do. Meaning, like I had said, I'll move to New York and work for free tomorrow, and I meant it. I was ready to quit everything. My wife, then girlfriend and soon to be fiance at the time, was like, "We're moving to New York on Monday." I was like, "That's right." And so we were willing to put everything on the line for it. And I think that coupled with I'm interested in science. We've been looking a lot into healthcare. They had been looking and then still do look into healthcare quite aggressively. I'd like to look at this. And Kevin is all about people. I learned that from Kevin early on. He likes picking very smart and ambitious people because he believes people are what build things. And I think he's right about that. And so I think being able to convey that was really important.
Yeah, and if the audience isn't familiar with Kevin, I mean New York tech wouldn't exist if it wasn't for him. So DoubleClick, took that, at the helm and took it to great success and ultimately an
Yep,
acquisition by Google. And then AliCorp is amazing. I mean, MongoDB, Zola, Business Insider, these are all companies they incubated, not just invested in, which there's a whole portfolio on that side too. So when
exactly.
you met with them, you eventually you joined the firm. So it's a very non-traditional path to venture, right? So
Absolutely.
so how did that work out where Kevin was like, yes, this is an area that you're deeply familiar with. We need to be there. Let's work together.
Yeah, I had made a presentation. So he said, like, let me know what some of your thoughts are. What would it look like if you were to come work here? And I made a whole presentation on areas in material science I think are underexplored, areas in material science that are overexplored, and kind of pitched on what I wanted to do there. And he very quickly, Kevin moves fast, and we move even faster at Radical AIs, like we like to say. So he moved quickly on that. And I think when I started integrating into the firm, look, venture is not a hard business per se in a intellectual capacity. What's hard is that you have to be right over a series of times and in a long period of time as well. And that's the challenging part of actually scaling returns. But the concept of investing in early stage companies, especially the earlier you go versus growth stage, which of course brings different elements, is really not that intellectually difficult. And so it just comes down to work, studying the space, learning about a space, and putting in the work to meet people and understand the trends that are going to form over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's what I did when I got to Alicorp.
Yeah. So what'd you work on while you're there?
So I did a bunch of stuff. When I first got there, I looked at some incubations with inside the scientific community space. And I had looked at how could I build better community to really connect scientists. It's very funny the way all these dots are going to connect together in the future because science is fragmented. I had looked into a couple other incubations with other team members, supporting them on the research side of them, talking to customers, diving into markets, actually doing talent searches with both our internal talent firm or whether it was an external recruiting firm that we hired as well, and really thinking about the right way to build that. And then investing. I invested in material science, 3D printing, informatics. I had done semiconductors. And so I had started to invest across a wide range of different markets that sit within inside material science in some way and was doing both of those things throughout my 2.5 years there.
And it was mainly seed investing.
Yes, correct. Early stage, between $1 and $5 million checks.
So obviously, it's got to be a great idea, a great product wherever it's at, market opportunity that's investable for a VC
Mhm.
outcome. But obviously, you're investing in people at that stage that, there's so
Correct.
much that isn't created yet. So what will you look at? How do you identify a team to ultimately invest in?
So if you would have asked me this 2 years ago, my answer would be entirely different than it is today. I make the joke about myself all the time that I never understood why entrepreneurs kind of pushed back when I was giving advice or feedback because they said you hadn't built anything yet. And I was kind of butthurt, to be super honest and candid about it. I was like, that's not fair. I'm here. Like, I think I know what I'm working on. I'm smart in the space. Now in the seat I'm in today, man, were those
Ah,
entrepreneurs right to call me out. I think the thing that you really need to look for is team, and it's cliche, but at the early stage, you're not going to have a lot of market validators or milestones that the company's built today. So if you don't have milestones from a technology or from a business market perspective, then the only milestone and or criteria to grade against is the people who are actually going to go accomplish those milestones. And I think that's why team is so cliche at the seed stage, yet so important because it is all around why is this person and this founding team going to run through walls to make their vision become a reality? My best investors today, they did long diligence with their teams. Their first two questions with me are always, what's your vision? And why the heck are you the person that's going to build it? Always. That's where the conversation started. And from there, they went into deep technical details and understanding our approach and who we had hired and, our business model. But if you can't answer those first two things, honestly, the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. You can have the greatest business idea in the world. You can have the greatest business model you think you've created. You can even be good at bringing the team around the table. But if that leadership team and that co-founding team are not focused on spending their life's work on this mission, it's just too hard to get behind them. It just requires too much effort and discipline to really achieve success.
and this isn't like a podcast that's going to focus on your investment. We're going to get into your company in a
Sure.
second here. Like, what were the common pitches that you would see where they weren't getting that message across that we're uniquely qualified to solve this problem and this is why and the
Sure.
market?
Well, the ones for me that I think don't resonate are ones where they just recite their LinkedIn profile back to you. I mean, I got to be honest, this might be a little bit aggressive, but I don't care about the LinkedIn profile. How many great founders in the world didn't have the perfect LinkedIn profile before they went out and built a massive company? What I care about is why are you so passionate about this area? And what do you know or want to build that no one else is paying attention to? And when you ask that question, you might have someone who has not come from the field that you're looking into, but has spent the last 6 months having thousands of conversations, doing deep research across the space, and has actually walked into, I think this is one of the biggest opportunities in the world, and no one's paying attention. And so I want to go out and tackle it. And so I just think, focusing too much on, look, I've done it before, for me is not a relevant criteria. I'm a first time founder with Radical AI. I probably have a little bit of bias in my answer to that. I'll be admit that, but I just don't think you have had to have done things before to be qualified to do them today. I actually think life works the opposite way. I think it's for people who take action.
So true. So true. All right, let's talk about radical AI.
Sure.
How did it originate? Like, let's start building
Yeah,
towards what you're doing now.
absolutely. So Radical AI. So myself and another one of my co-founders, Jorge Colindres, who was also at AliCorp at the time, sat next to each other in the office. And Jorge, one of the smartest people I've ever met, I come in one morning and he is highlighting scientific research papers. And I'm like, and he's a software engineer. He had been on the founding engineering team of 2 startups. They both exited successfully. He went and got his MBA at Dartmouth, and then he joined Kevin, was there for 5 years. I'm like, why are you highlighting science papers? What's happening today that this is going on? And he looks me in the face and he says, Joseph, everyone's talking about AI, and I do not understand why all of the technology we're seeing in AI is wrappers built on top of models in marketing or email or whatever. Surely, if the technology is this impressive, there must be better applications we can use it in. So I am reading ML research papers to understand if it is good or if this is all going to be a fad. I said, and what did you find out? He said, it's really, really good. The technology is incredible. We just have to find out a good place to use it. I don't understand why no one's using this to cure cancer. And I said, well, Jorge, I don't know if you can cure cancer. It's a mutation of cells, but I love the thinking. What about material science? Material science impact every single industry in the world: automotive, aerospace, manufacturing, defense, climate, energy, semiconductors. The most important industries in the world are all a direct result from materials R&D. And we spent the next 3 months diving deep into the intersection of material science, AI, and what we soon learned to be autonomy or self-driving robotic labs, where we met our third co-founder, Dr. Herdseeder.
I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right. This is probably going to be one of the many times throughout this conversation where I'm like, this is way above my head. Uh, so, you know what? The thing I really appreciate about the platform shift to AI, I feel like it's surfaced the brilliant minds to work on hard things again. Yes, there are the
Okay.
wrapper companies. There's going to be a lot of that because there needs to be. But someone like you that's working on what you're working on, I'm just like, this is why AI needs to exist for the
Yep.
potential to cure or, hopefully slow down can't whatever
Yep.
healthcare, like there's so many use cases and opportunities. So when I was reading about your third co-founder, he's a professor at Berkeley and
Uh-huh.
he's working on this fully autonomous lab, like a robotics lab. So what was it? What is it?
Absolutely. So this is why we got connected. So as we were diving into machine learning for material science, we started to run into this problem of data. In material science, we don't have a lot of data that we can train on to build models, right? We can't go index Wikipedia or other publications and pull in information. So we kind of started looking into, okay, well, how do you generate this data? And we'll talk about experimental data, I'm sure, when we come to our flywheel, which is very important for radical AI. So we bumped into Dr. Cedar's work and he reached out to him. He agreed to meet. We spent 30 minutes with him, pitching him on the vision. And he was the first person in that world that we had talked to who said, yeah, I know. I talked about this 10 years ago in my Scientific American article. And we were like, finally, like someone sees it. So we hung up that call. We sent him an email, said, you have to build this company with us. You get it. This is everything you've been talking about for the last decade. We'll fly to California tonight and let's have a conversation. And he said, great, let's get, lunch tomorrow, dinner tomorrow. Let's go from there. Flew to California the next day. I had lunch and dinner with him, talked about what it would be like to start a company together. We pitched him our vision. His vision was the same. And the three of us, decided we were going to start Radical AI.
So what was his lab actually doing though?
So his lab does inorganic chemistry, a lot of oxide growth, for example, and they do 55 inorganic experiments a day. And so it is this full lab. They call it the A lab at Berkeley, where it can really go from synthesis to characterization, which is a great stepping stone. When he first started building that lab, there was a lot of pushback on autonomous science. Now, you just saw this week, the NSF actually put another two different $100 million programs out on self-driving lab technology, which we can get into. And so he saw this wave coming and really built one of the first labs trying to pretty much execute against that. We take it a couple steps further and we don't use Berkeley technology at all. Just the concept of the self-driving lab was really interesting and why he joined, but that's what their lab is focused on today.
Okay, so he writes this publication 10 years ago. And is it because finally computing has caught up where his vision is like, now is the time? And he's like, yes, we need to build this.
Correct. So the publication was a lot around this gold mine of material science and kind of the way that density functional theory and molecular dynamics, really quantum chemistry, which is the simulation world of materials discovery, was going to be really impacted by high performance compute. And this was the stepping stones into, of course, AI and now autonomy and where it is today. That's correct.
All right. So from your website, it says space exploration, clean energy, transportation, national security, biotechnology, semiconductors share the same root issue. We do not have the materials to solve them. So that's the problem that you're ultimately working on.
Yep, that's exactly right. And specifically in materials, there are two core things we always talk about. One, timelines, very long timelines in the material discovery process. Typically, usually north of 10 years to actually go from that novel discovery to commercialization of that material. And then the second is cost. We usually see north of 100 million to do that same scaling across one material system. And so, in short, you have arguably one of the largest markets in the world. All those industries that you just mentioned, of course, encompass everything. It's crucial to the world that we all want to live in and build, and we cannot do it fast enough. That's a hard problem, and that's the exact problem that radical AI is trying to solve.
Okay. So just as an example, like, I don't know if this is something you guys are even thinking about or working on,
Sure,
but if we wanted to like select space exploration,
sure.
Elon Musk wants to colonize Mars. But
Mhm.
from what I just read on your website, we don't have the materials to actually pull that off right now, right? So
Sure.
what materials would your company help identify to make that a reality?
Sure. So we aren't working on these today, but I'll answer that example and then I could talk about the things that we're doing as well. So something like Mars, two things immediately come to mind. Number one, when you are going to Mars, if you're going to bring humans there, you're going to need reusable rockets. And so you're going to need heat shields or what are called thermal protection systems, TPS, to actually let the rocket go up to space and then come back. And right now, you see Elon talk a lot about kind of the lack of reusability of the TPS material and the heat shield that they use today, a direct material science problem. And so that's the first innovation you're going to need if you're going to repeatedly travel to the red planet. Once you get there, how are you going to power everything? I mean, you're not going to bring oil and gas rigs with you. We don't even know if you can do that up there.
Right.
You're certainly not going to put solar panels on those rockets and carry them up there. You're probably going to build solar energy on the surface. But on the surface of Mars, we might not have the same elements available to make the same photovoltaics that we make on Earth. Material science problem. What are the raw minerals and elements you're going to use to create a new material to power the habitat that we build there? Don't have that answer yet either. And so for that, those are just two quick examples of as you go there, what they do. Where we started as a company was in what we call alloys, and they're in the defense and aerospace as well as the energy sector. And these alloys or structural materials, as they're sometimes called, are a really hard research problem. There are a bunch of different combinations of elements, given that there are so many different elements on the periodic table, you can pull into making different combinations. So we think it would take humans between 5,000 to 7,000 years to explore all of them. Not going to do that. This is where self-driving labs and machine learning are very useful. But then second is a lot of these structural materials make up the industries that we care about. In aerospace, jet turbines and airplane wings. In defense, advanced missile systems like hypersonics, which is a core area for us today. Or even in something like a nuclear fusion reactor, where the magnetic confinement actually damages materials like the diverter, which need novel alloys to actually have longevity and scale. And so these are kind of systems that we're working in because there's a huge commercial appetite as well as a requirement. We call these enabling technologies, not optimization technologies. And then there's a research problem there that in the normal scientific process, people have struggled to comprehend today. That's what we can actually go after. So that's kind of the first market that we're moving into.
So there was a $10 million initial pre-seed investment in March of 2020. 24 led by Alicorp. But you just recently announced a $55 million seed, which was the third largest seed equity only round in New York City, which
Mhm.
I mean, I think the classifications of pre-seed, seed, Series A, like those have all just like gone out the window.
Sure.
I feel like, a company like yours, you're building something, so that's capital intensive, but like where are you at now, like building this facility?
Yeah, so I think it's worth taking one step back. So what's the vision? And this gets to kind of where and why we raised what we did and what we're building. So the vision that we see for the company is to remove materials as the biggest bottleneck to our most important industries. And the way that we want to go about doing that is with this AI scientist. And this AI scientist really can utilize a flywheel of innovation, where on one end, it is using advanced machine learning technology, diffusion based models, LLMs, even something like a graph neural net to generate and predict new materials. And then a fully robotic self driving lab to test those materials, actually analyze those materials with machine learning, and then capture all of that data, which it's actually using to retrain those models so that we build this kind of flywheel of innovation. And so to do that, you need a very interdisciplinary team to go out and build that. And we have 5 different technological buckets within inside the company today already: machine learning and AI, material science, software engineering, mechanical engineering, and autonomy. And so even across those 5, a lot of overlap in what they're focused on, and a lot of kind of individual focuses in their core areas of expertise. To do that, you just need a lot of capital. And so that's the first reason we raised a big pre-seed round was, we needed to go out and hire great talent. We needed to hire across all of these areas. And we had to have enough compute to be able to start building our AI models that we actually are going to predict new materials with. And the second reason, especially on the seed round, the $55 million round, is what our approach is as a company. We want to build and replace Dow Chemical today. They're one of the large material companies in the world. They've been around for 140 something years at this point, and they don't drive any novel innovation. They really focus on optimization problems, to make Wall Street happy. And so, what we think there's an opportunity to do is to do this entire fundamental discovery approach with a focus on real commercialization and the markets that I mentioned today. And that's what we want to build. And so, to do that, you have to vertically integrate from discovery to validation to actually full scale manufacturing. And that process is quite complex. This seed round allows us to take the first step of discovery and a partial step inside validating those materials we're making so that we can really show our scientific process is the best in the world and we can go make these materials at scale following future rounds. And that's where we are aiming the company today.
You're bu- you're building the most advanced materials R&D facility in the world, looking to do hundreds of thousands of experiments per year.
Yep.
Is this a compute experiment or is it a physical experiment?
So it's physical, especially on the experimental data side. We do use compute to run our machine learning models. It's just nowhere near as aggressively as language model companies or other AI companies will need. On the physical side, so the big bottleneck in science is that one, most stuff is human driven, and so it's quite slow. And two, we don't capture 90% of the work that we do. How come? Well, because as a scientist, everything is the scientific method, right? Trial and error. And a lot of the stuff that we do in the lab doesn't work. That's actually how we get to the 10% of things that do work. We don't really ever capture that information. It doesn't show up in your publications. It was all the mistakes that you made. You don't really talk about it within the research community. And even if you and I were working on the exact same research problem, I have no idea what you've done in the lab, and you have no idea what I've done. So we can't build on top of it. And so there's this vacuum of data that exists where we actually don't have the information needed to build a lot of these models. But in self-driving labs, we do capture that data, whether it's temperature, pressure, oxidation, concentration, even something like the humidity in a room, which might or might not affect an experiment, capture all that information and bring that into forming this proprietary data set. Spans both computational and experimental results. And so this physical nature is very important to your question. And we want to build out capability to be able to have 100 experiments per day per lab line. A typical scientist like myself does anywhere from 50 to 100 experiments per year. And so it's really an order of magnitude or two that we're jumping off the typical process that we see today.
This is great. I'm like, I'm totally exposing my how smart I am in this conversation because I'm
That's
like,
great.
how is it working? Uh, so when you say it's self-driving, like, so is it robotic? Is that what's driving these? Okay,
So it's robotic as well as automated in some fashion as well. And I'll explain what I mean. When we think about robotics, we think a lot about something like a robotic arm, for
right,
example, or
exactly.
a mobile robot, maybe even a little bit a car rover that can move
Yeah,
around.
that's what I'm envisioning in my head. This like facility with
Yes.
these robotic arms doing these things. I'm
And
like,
we
that's probably not what's happening now.
No,
Is
we
it?
do have those things. Those things
Okay.
are going on, but they're coupled with other automation aspects as well. And so this might be something like loading a scientific tool where we put our template with the robotic arm onto our mount, and then that mount, just uses pneumatics to push into, for example, with an actuator into a tool. Kind of put that under the automation category, right? And these two are very closely aligned, but we have a lot of different approaches inside the lab that make this loop fully connected. We are not there yet today, but the vision is that no scientists stand in that lab. You could be on the beach, you could be at home, or you could be at, your child's basketball, soccer, football, hockey game and be controlling and watching what your experiments are doing in the lab in real time. That's the future that we want to build towards.
How much of it is the scientists that have to tell the self-driving R&D facility, this is what I'm working on, this is what I want it to do, and how much does that input create its own multiple experiments based on that input?
A lot. So we call this input intuition. It's the scientific intuition that someone in the field will have. And we can actually capture this intuition now. And we're currently building a data set on this intuition. We actually think this is a true representation of intelligence. When you think about a scientist, what makes Joseph good at what he did? And maybe you could argue if it was good or not back in the science days. Much better entrepreneur than scientist. What made me good was, well, I had a lot of experience in running past experiments, and I could make really good new hypotheses based on the results that we were seeing. So that intuition that makes a scientist great is what we're capturing as human scientists, kind of relay to the mechanical and software teams who build the autonomy in our lab, why they're doing what they're doing and the reason they chose to do what they're doing. And so both of those things, as well as like the operation specifically, I move here, I put this here, are really important to actually understanding where intuition comes from in the human science process, and then how do we replicate that in the AI science process.
And is this what torch sim is?
No, Torch Sim is actually a piece of getting to this analysis, but is actually on the computational side. So there are two kind of different buckets that we play in. One is on the computational or simulating materials. And so we actually generate novel structures and compounds with simulation tools. Torch Sim helps that. The experimental side is a lot more um, older, more traditional machine learning techniques, computer vision, Bayesian optimization, but then also a lot of autonomy and robotics as well. Actually moving actuators and robotics around so that we can run this interconnected system with no humans in the loop. So both of those feed towards this interconnected flywheel, but also live in their own right as well.
Once you run all these experiments and then land on something that's tangible and real, do you expect to produce that, manufacture, or are you going to sell it to a DAO? Like you said, displace DAO, but I could see them being hungry for this research.
I think they will be personally. I'm biased, but I think the world of science is going this way. We want to go full stack. We want to go from discovery to manufacturing. And we think there are two core reasons why. Number one, if you build the scientific process with AI and autonomy at the center, you can shorten the timelines and the cost to bridge that gap today. Number two, we can do that process of manufacturing and scale entirely focused on markets that don't even exist yet today in the future. Something like a room temperature superconductor, which, if you remember LK99 2 years or so ago, the world freaked out about, but was not able to be experimentally made. We want to be in a place in a couple of years where we have the most data, the best models, and the most effective lab to be able to discover something like that. And in our opinion, that could be a multi-trillion-dollar market that unfolds from that. And so it's not even just replacing Dow, but it's actually taking a step past the optimization problems they work on and enabling new technology to proliferate, like Mars, we talked about earlier. That's where we really want to see the company move to, and that is our North Star as an organization.
And this is from your website as well. A multi-decade pursuit, the complete reconstruction of the scientific process. So when I hear statements like that, and I see your investors, a lot of corporate VC arms,
Yes,
strategics, like this is a big swing. This is not a,
yes, it
hey, we're
is.
gonna build a nice little company, and no, this is a generation-defining opportunity.
Yeah, this is absolutely generation defining. This will be one of the most important companies in the world, in our opinion. When we started the company and we were pitching Kevin Ryan and the team at AliCorp, we had said to them, look, we want to build this in a binary way. This is either $100 billion company that's one of the most important in the world, or the technology does not work and we do not drive enough value to recreate the scientific process. It will be one of those two things. That's the exact way that we want to build it. And so this is a huge
Go big or
swing,
go
but
home.
that's exactly right. I think I learned that from my AliCorp days and being an investor, but we think the opportunity here is one of the biggest in the world. It's very rare a company gets to impact every part of humanity, whether you're into aerospace, you're into energy, or you're into fashion and clothes. All three of those things directly come back to materials innovation and material science. And so for us, there could be no bigger mission statement in the world.
Well, when Radical AI is $1 trillion company, I could say Joseph was on my podcast in the
Absolutely.
early days. So,
And I'm happy to come back at any point in time. So just give me a call.
well, so what have you learned? You talked about, founders used to give you some kickback when you were giving advice. Now you've been in the CEO founder seat for this stretch of time. What have been some of the key lessons learned?
Yeah, one, bias to action. I say this repeatedly. My team knows I say it. When I go on podcast, I say it. When I talk to recruits, I say it. You have to have a vicious bias to action, almost insane level of a bias to action. Why? Because what you're trying to do, certainly in Radical's case, is so hard. Actually, to some people, it's impossible. And that's the entire reason for doing it. So if you are going to make enough progress in the short time that you have as an early stage company, then the only way to find success, in my opinion, or maybe one of the most important, not only, but one of the most important, is a ridiculous bias to action. I have actually banned the word strategy at Radical AI. That'll come to eat me one day. I'm going to have to reverse that decision, but bias to action is one of the important calling cards. And we're crazy about our culture at the company. I can get into our culture specifically, but it's an area that we live and die by. You have to have a bias to action.
Well, there's some people that love to talk strategy all day long, but if they don't get it done, there's no point in having a strategy.
That's exactly right. And you can strategize the greatest theories in the world. If you can't execute on them, they're honestly irrelevant.
Culture is important. So how have you thought about building the culture behind the
Yeah.
company?
Yeah. So the culture is one of the most important things because all companies are built by people. And the people are the most important resource, that Radical AI invest in. Our people are the best in the world at what they do. And everyone that's at the company is here for a mission because we tell every single person we interview, if you're looking for a job, this is not the place for you. Go work at big tech. There's another company I'm sure you can go work for. If you want to work on a mission and put your life's work towards making an impact, then this is the place that you should come. And so we get great people from that, and we hold a very high bar. And culture for us is three things. Number one, biased action. Talked about that. Number two, first principle thinking. I don't care if you're the newest member of the company or the oldest member of the company, including myself or Jorge or Herd. Asking why is the most important question we can ask. And every single person in the company is expected to ask why repeatedly when we think about the organization, as well as the specific areas that we're moving into and things that we think are true, but when you dive into first principle analysis, might not be true. And then number three is really this idea around fast decision making. We call it the 51% rule. I believe SpaceX invented this rule. We took it from them, where when you are at 51% of a decision, make a decision, because the time it'll take to continue pondering on that decision will be longer than executing, failing, learning from that failing, and then making an update from that. And so for us, especially in day-to-day decisions, not long-term strategic, the whole company's moving this direction, we move insanely fast. And when you couple that with bias to action, we think that's how we can do so much in such a short period of time. But you have to have this ability to take risks. We are risk prone, not risk adverse. And we think you have to be if you're going to try to do something as hard as radical AI.
Talked about how I think there's a lot of brilliant minds that are working on hard problems again due to the AI platform shift. What other areas would you like to see people tackle?
Yeah, that's a great question. Gosh, there are so many. So the physical world, which is a very broad category, I think is going to be incredibly interesting. Materials are one, bio is another. Even some of the legacy industries that exist today, like construction or something similar. Where is AI going to fit into that? I don't know. I don't work in that space, but man, it's exciting to think about the areas in the physical world that are going to be really impactful. I think robotics for me, and I'm biased given we use them, is something I'm super excited about. When robots start to learn at the level a human being can learn, they can start to really do tasks better than a human can, of course. When you're building a self-driving lab, that's a really exciting proposition. If we didn't have to do path planning and training for all of our robots, we'd save a lot of man hours on that and be able to focus on different places inside the company. So I think robotics is going to be one of the biggest fields as well inside the AI space. I think everyone knows that today, but for us, we're particularly excited given how much it impacts our self-driving lab technology and then therefore our materials flywheel in total.
Three apps you can't live without, can't be Slack, email, or calendar.
That's unanswerable. My email and my calendar are my life. My phone, I call people all day, every day, bias to action. Um, Two is Whoop. Whoop keeps me in check on when I'm going a little bit too much off the rails. Like it's like you've got a little
Sleep,
too many
sleep,
3 hour,
sleep.
yeah, you have a little bit too many 3 hour sleeps in a row. Let's bump that up a little bit. And I do believe I'm a deep believer in health and longevity, and so I've been working on that. And then, um, yeah, third one. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to take emails. Email on my calendar are what I do every day. I am constantly talking to people. I have to cheat on the rules and say that those are too important to give away.
See, I love that you said your phone because you're not going to be like, I'm going to send an email and wait for them to reply. You're like, I'm going to call the person and
For
we're going to
sure.
talk live. We're going to talk.
Yeah,
We're going
absolutely.
to get it done now.
Absolutely. I have this, I love bringing back the phone call. And there's a bunch of other people who have been saying this isn't like a Joseph idea, but just the old days of picking up the phone. Hey, what's up? How's it going? Kind of what I mentioned to you. We were talking before we started this with Abe, a good friend of mine from AliCorp, where just pick up the phone and call someone. You might not have talked to them in a while, but you can have a great conversation and learn a ton of things. And you can also go after people, talent, business opportunities, or even investors that way. And I think, again, a bias to action always serves you well.
All right. Would you have any good podcast book recommendations for entrepreneurs?
A really interesting book that I read recently was The Man Who Solved the Market. I've read it a few times now. I think I read it the first time maybe 2 years ago. I was behind the way there. And the reason I think it's so interesting. So Simons is this PhD, brilliant mathematician, essentially, but he doesn't love it. And he's like, I want to trade. I want to make money on Wall Street. I want to be in finance. And he kind of ignores what everyone tells him and just starts Renaissance Technologies, which we now know is one of the greatest trading firms in history. But his evolution and story around how committed he was to doing that, and not because he thought it was going to make a lot of money, honestly, he did pay attention to the financial aspect, but just what he wanted to do and what he knew he was good at. serve well for entrepreneurs, and I think it's not cliche. A second one is Skunk Works. I forget the author, but it's all about kind of Skunk Works and how it formed and some of the projects they worked on in the early days. And I got to be honest with you, some of them make radical AI feel not that hard. And so, like, if they could do it back then, it's a good inspiration that anything's possible. A lot of the stuff that they talk about, you see in existence today, or you think it's not as crazy as it was back then. It's a great lesson for entrepreneurs to always remember everything is impossible until it's not.
Well, usually I ask final questions like, what do you like to do for fun outside of work? But you know what? I have a sense that you'd rather talk about hiring. So what are you
Sure.
hiring for?
So a bunch of different roles. We are hiring across a couple strategic roles at the leadership level, head of autonomy, head of AI, which we're looking for people on. So if you're interested, please let us know. And then across all 5 teams. So roboticist on the software side, material scientists, both experimental and computational, machine learning engineers, and AI research scientists, as well as full stack software engineers and mechanical engineers. All of us is on our job board. If you want to reach out to me, cold email me directly. I make an effort to respond to every cold email that I receive and be happy to have a conversation around what you want to do and why you think radical AI will be your life's work.
Well, if you are fit for any of those roles and you're like on a mission to be part of this company, call to action, get a hold of Joseph, and
Yep.
he's going to appreciate that and be like, this person is so maniacal about getting in this company and is qualified. That's how you're going to get in
If you
because
can hit a bias to action, take very quick decision making, and then also be, willing to ask why. Why can I be a good fit here? You're gonna fit a pretty good early check on that culture that we're doing at Radical AI. So would highly encourage anyone to do that.
cool. Well, Joseph, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story, obviously all the great work you and your team are up to at Radical AI, and obviously all the great advice.
Thanks, Keith. This is a blast. Happy to come back anytime.